Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Strategic Management, and thank you for joining the web conference today. I hope you all had a good start to your week. Today, we are going to be wrapping up from last session and also going into a discussion on the internal environment. But before we do that, I would like to ask if there are any questions that you had from the last time, because I'd be happy to answer any of those for you now. No one? Okay, fine. Then I will go into just a couple of recommendations for the presentation. We will do a wrap up from session 1 and talk about the internal environment following that. And then we'll do our Bosch case discussion. And after that, I'll go into a little bit about what we'll be doing on our next web conference, which is kind of an introduction to our on-campus weekend, and also some other details regarding that time. Okay, great. So we had talked about last time some preliminary sources and recommendations of sources that you could use for the presentation. And I wanted to just document those for you. Again, we had covered those last week in class, but these are some of the areas that you could potentially look at when you are researching your presentations and when you are putting together the information on your projects. So you could look at academic research, of course, any popular business periodicals. There are a number of those out there. Other fact-based periodicals, if they are appropriate. Company research sites are also very good. Investor relations websites are also a very good source of information. And also these different international organizations, if they are appropriate to your topic. So another source is trade or industry publications, government publications. There is really a wealth of material out there. So you should have the opportunity to get quite a bit of input for your presentations. Luis sent out the groups today. Please start talking to the individuals in your groups about the subjects that you would like to cover, a subject that you would like to cover, the specific topic, and also the potentially different companies. If you would like to use companies to illustrate your topic, please do start talking about that, start thinking about that, and getting back to me with your input. Again, one-page presentation, that would be ideal, and that is also required. Just do a one-page project presentation, and sooner is better than later, because again, the topics are on a first-come, first-served basis, as are the companies. So please, if you have some ideas in mind, please do get them to me soon. And sooner is better than later, again, because you are far more likely to get the topic of your choice and also the companies of your choice. Okay, anything on that? Any questions at all? Okay, good. Well, if you think of something, you can always reach out to me a bit later.
I do have a question, Professor.
Yes, Tayo, go ahead, please.
Yeah, good afternoon. So for the project, are we picking topics from the list of topics in the syllabus, or how do we go about that?
I gave you a list of topics in the syllabus as a starting point. You can choose any of those, or you can choose another topic that is related to strategic management. So don't feel that you are bound to those topics, but those are some suggestions just to get you started. So if you want to do something else, no problem. I gave you some examples of that last week in our session. So you can, choose what is of interest to you. And if you choose something off the list, please do make sure that you submit it to me, and I can help you. Narrow it down if necessary, or I can help you otherwise really rationalize it so that you can do a good job on the topic.
Outstanding. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, very good. So let's move on. At the end of our session, we were talking about things that made strategic planning so difficult. So let's move on to the topic of competitive advantage. What is competitive advantage? And really, it's a firm's ability to, as you see here, create value in a way that its rivals cannot. So in creating value in a way its rivals cannot, it can be through creative ways to do different processes. It can be creative ways to shape the business model. It can be creative ways to really understand how to address the market and how to go into the market, how to time their entry to the market. There are a lot of ways that competitive advantage can be attained. Now, the real question here too is, how do firms create sustained above average returns? Because the competitive advantage, of course, talks about, especially for publicly traded companies and in privately held companies, how these firms can create better returns than their rivals, than their competitors. But how do they do this in a sustained way? And that is always the issue, really, because firms can come out with an innovative idea, they can come out with a great product, but if they don't really keep that up, then they are not going to continue to maintain their growth in the market. If they have if they have if they're publicly traded and they have investors, the investors are going to be saying, okay, what's your next big move here? Where do you see the company going? What have you? So the sustainability of this competitive advantage is always the issue. Now, there are really, typically, when you talk about competitive advantage, and you will see this throughout the literature, there are three basic ways of looking at this. One is the internal perspective, and that's often referred to as the resource view, or sometimes it's called RBV. If you're reading along, you might see this as referred to as the resource-based view of the firm. And the whole point here is that some academicians and some researchers and people who follow strategic management and strategic advantage some of them look at this internal perspective as the bundles of resources and capabilities that the firms enjoy and that they can use to attain competitive advantage over the firms. So in other words, it's not just looking at the external perspective, which we will get to in a moment, but it is leveraging to the best of your ability your internal resources to to achieve and sustain a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Now, the next one is the external perspective. And this is really looking at the function of competitive advantage based on industry attractiveness. So it's Porter's Five Forces model, some of the other models that we will be going over next week and during our on-campus weekend. And the idea here is that firms should position themselves in attractive industries and understand which strategies will make their current industries more attractive. And we'll be getting into that more deeply as we talk about the external environment of the firm. And then the third one is a dynamic perspective. And the idea here is that in rapidly changing markets, the firm's current market position is not an accurate prediction of future performance. And this reads a little bit like a safe harbor statement, but the idea here is that you don't look just internally or just externally, but you need to understand how the firm evolved, how the firm has arrived at its current competitive position or not, and what the future trends in the marketplace and also potentially internally for the firm can really allow it to gain some competitive advantage in the marketplace. So these three are the basic aspects of looking at competitive advantage for different companies. Now, looking at it from the standpoint of the dynamic perspective, the whole idea here is that the advantage can shift quickly in unstable markets. And unstable markets are, it's kind of an interesting thing to discuss because markets change at different rates. So there are, I believe we talked about this a bit last week, different types of markets and different types of industries change fairly rapidly, whereas others change at a much slower pace. So for example, capital-intensive markets such as automotive and heavy equipment, such as steel and other markets of that nature will take a longer cycle to affect change than some other markets such as consumer electronics, a lot of other consumer-based goods, the fashion industry, and what have you. So the thing is, you have to really understand what that dynamic is and what that change rate is in order to effectively develop strategy for that particular market and understand what the market forces are, which are affecting the competitive nature of the firm. Now, on the external dimension, in terms of the high velocity markets, as we just discussed, the markets are changing at a very, very rapid rate. And internally, though, you have to understand which firm resources and capabilities, which we will talk about a bit later today, enable the core competency of embracing or continuous disruptive change, meaning that companies need to be relatively agile within their organizational structures, within their organizational processes, and the way they manage the firm. So there are a lot of different things that come into play here when you are looking at the different dimensions of the dynamic perspective. Okay, I wanted to just touch on social very briefly here because you know the whole idea of social technologies and the social environment has been very, very prevalent, I guess, within the last 10 plus years, 10 to 15 years. And it is, it's, you know, fairly new regarding the business strategy environment, but the whole idea of social is not a new phenomenon. So research really began on this in the late 1800s, and I give you here a couple of researchers that worked on this, Durkheim and Tönnies, and they looked at different social groups and different sort of congregations and different types of social communities, and looked at the different links that they had together. So this is kind of not a new perspective, but it, of course, has been very much accelerated by the fact that technologies allow it to be, and accelerated in this day and age. So when you get into the early 20th century, there is another researcher, Simmel. He looks at social patterns of social interactions. From the 30s onward, it has gotten a lot of traction from institutions such as Harvard, University of Chicago, other universities. And now the area is researched by many. If you go out on, for instance, the Harvard Business School Publishing website, you will find literally hundreds of articles that are focused on the social environment and how it is impacting the business community. I've given you three here. Granovetter, Freeman, and Wellman are historically popular authors and researchers that have looked at this. The first, I'd like to call your attention to the first one, Mark Granovetter, on the strength of weak ties. And this was one of the really seminal pieces that was done on the whole idea of the social environment and how it impacts the business community. And it is, if you do any reading or if you conduct any research in this area, you will probably run into a reference from this on the strength of weak ties. And basically what he did was he did an extensive survey of how people got their next job. And it wasn't by applying for a job, it wasn't by asking their friends or even asking the friends of their friends to recommend them, but it was this whole idea of going several several steps onward. So he found by doing a pretty extensive survey, and this was paper-based, okay? We didn't have all of the wonderful online tools that we have now. So he did a pretty extensive paper-based survey that asked people how they got the job. And as it turns out, it was by several steps, so several associations later, that they were able to get the job. And these are called the weak ties because they are, excuse me, um, they are farther out than just accessing people you know or people or their friends or what have you. So it's a really interesting piece of research. And since then, some other updates have been done to that and some other pieces have been developed which have been have talked about that and have looked at it from a 21st century perspective. So I wanted to call that to your attention. Okay, just a little bit on leadership here, and we do not again have a specific class on leadership. I'm sure that many of you have taken specific classes on leadership. It is a very hot topic, especially these days. But the strategic leadership here, as you see, is basic responsibility of the CEO. And that is really managing the overall enterprise. The CEO is responsible for the outcomes, the organizational outcomes, the financial performance of the firm, the competitive superiority of the firm, and really the long-term survival of the firm. So it is a very critical piece. And as we talked about last week, really the leader sets the tone. The leader sets the tone for the entire company. And it is so critical that this person understands where the company should go and how to take it in the future direction. So just a couple of examples of leaders here. There are, for those of you who've taken courses in leadership, you know that there are different leadership styles and that companies and leaders execute these in different ways. But I would like to give you kind of an interesting example here about business leaders becoming celebrities. So who is Larry Ellison? Who can tell me who Larry Ellison is? Robert, go ahead, please.
Yeah, he's the CEO of Oracle, founder.
Yes, he is. And he has been very, very successful. He started it out decades ago. The company has grown and prospered and really been very successful worldwide. So has he. He has a big yacht. He owns part of Hawaii. He has significant investments, and he has just really taken the company to a different level.
And he brought the America's Cup back to the U.S.
Yes, he did. Hence the yacht. Okay. So but he's a colorful individual. He's an exceptionally colorful individual. And I love this quote because it is just so telling of Larry. And he talks about the fact this is way back in 2008. And he talks about, well, I can't think of anything that isn't cloud computing with all these announcements, only industry that is more fashion driven than women's fashion. He has no idea what anybody's talking about, complete gibberish, you know, on and on and on. Well, in 2008, cloud computing was just getting a lot of traction in the market. There were a lot of different attempts at early versions of cloud computing, I guess you could say, in the late 1990s with the ASPs, the application service providers, and it just wasn't the right time for that to happen and that to gain traction in the market for a number of reasons that we can maybe talk about later, but I won't go into them now. But in any case, by the time 2008 came around, there had been more traction and far more interest in cloud computing. At that point in time, Salesforce had been in business for a number of years. They were doing very well in terms of building the business, in terms of building the idea of cloud computing. And to be fair, Oracle did not do cloud computing in the purest sense. So in the early 2000s, there was a lot of talk and a lot of press and such about what really the definition of cloud computing was. And we're not going to get into that either. However, suffice it to say that Oracle did provide a lot of what they called managed services for their customers, which could be, I guess you could say, construed as a version of cloud computing. It wasn't really cloud computing, but it was managed services. Okay, so at this point, Oracle and some of the other large vendors were beginning to feel a lot of pressure from companies like Salesforce.com. So Larry came out with this very interesting quote in the press. Now, the even more interesting thing is that at that time, Larry and his family trusts were the majority owners of a company called NetSuite, which was a completely cloud computing company that had an ERP suite for small to medium businesses. So even though he claims he has no idea what anyone is talking about, he was heavily invested in the future in another company. And subsequently, some years later, Oracle actually bought NetSuite. So I think this is kind of an interesting case of irony here. And it's also just very indicative of Larry. He continues to come out with many colorful statements in the press. A few years ago, for instance, he was quoted as really as threatening to have his neighbor's trees cut down because it ruined his view from his very nice home on the hill in San Francisco, on and on and on. So he is just a very, very colorful and exceptionally a successful executive in the tech sector. And I have some other, as we go through the course, I'll have some other examples of different executives and their styles of leadership and management. Okay, so let's just talk about a little bit about executive roles, and they really have to address many audiences. And if you you may observe, if you follow executives over the period of their executive advancement, you'll probably observe that some of them grow into it. Some of them who are less seasoned in the industry or in their role will evolve into it over time. But they do have to become very expert at these different roles, the interpersonal roles, the informational roles, and the decision roles. So they have to be able to communicate very well to a wide variety of audiences. That includes the internal audience within the firm. It includes external audiences, such as investors, such as the community, such as other industry executives. They have to be able to communicate upwards to the board of directors. So it is a huge skill set that most people have to, in some way, shape, or form, develop. Now, many executives do develop these as they're coming up a succession planning chain, or as they are going through their different roles in the in the marketplace. But it's very critical that they can execute in all of these. Otherwise, there will be some issues, and sooner or later the board may step in and realize that the individual in charge really can't execute appropriately. Now, I wanted to share this piece of research with you on level 5 leaders. Now, this has been out for a while, and I expect some of you have read Good to Great by Jim Collins. Who has read this? Raise your hand if you've read this or you understand or you've seen it. Ah, Robert, of course. Anyone else? Okay, so I'll just give you a quick rundown here. It is a very interesting piece of work. As you see here, it was published in 2001, so it's been out for quite some time. But the um, research that was conducted is quite interesting. If you are in a store, and even if you don't want to buy the book, if you're in a bookstore, go and pick up the book and look at the back, because they have the research design in it. And it talks about how they have conducted research in a number of companies who have consistently, over time, outperformed the market. And they look at the succession planning routines in the company. They look at the characteristics of the leaders in the company, and it is really well done. And he has subsequently taken that body of research and improved upon it, and published a number of other books related to it. But just to give you the idea here from good to great, the level 1 to level 5 leaders, as you see, it goes up the pyramid, and it is increasingly focused on leadership. So you see the level 1 leaders are really focused on individual contributors. And then as it progresses up the pyramid, you see that there is more and more emphasis on leading groups to superior levels of performance. And then when we get at level 5, it's building greatness through a combination of will and humility. Now, after what I just said about Larry Ellison, you may wonder where the humility is coming from. But to be fair to Larry, he has brought up a lot of executives within his team who are now really running and managing the company, and he's always given them credit for their work. So there is, I guess you could call that humility. But I wanted to also talk about a little bit about these attributes of level 5 leaders. And Collins brings out that these two attributes of professional will and professional modesty really are at the root of the top leaders in an organization or a company or what have you. And there is a great quote here from Harry S. Truman on "You can accomplish anything in life, provided that you do not mind who gets the credit." So who is Harry Truman? Michael, go ahead, please.
He's the president who succeeded Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Yes, he is. He certainly was, and he was in a terribly difficult situation when he did that. So Roosevelt had been president for 4 terms, and that is no longer the case in the U.S. They changed the laws. Now they have a 2-term limit. But he had been president for 4 terms, and he had taken the country through a very, very difficult time. And he was also he was president throughout the Second World War. I think somebody has their mic open because we're getting a little feedback there. Okay, great, thank you. Anyway, so Roosevelt passed away before the end of the Second World War. Truman, as his vice president, found himself in the position of having to decide about bombing Japan in order to end the Second World War. Now, Harry Truman was kind of an interesting guy because he is the only president in the 20th century who did not have a college degree. He came from the Midwest. He had jobs that went from being a farmer for a number of years to working in a department store to moving into the military to finally being a judge in the local area. And then he ran for vice president. He became the vice president. And I am certain that this man had no idea that he would be faced with the types of decisions that he had to make. So he really had to reach out and get some guidance from other people, and he had to do a lot of he had to make a lot of brave and difficult decisions. So he was he was quite the guy. But I think this is a good quote, and I think he acted well under very serious and very pressure driven circumstances. Okay, let's take another take another shot at a leader here, and this is an interview. This I give you this. It's kind of a condensed version of an interview with Ford's Alan Mulally. Now, Alan Mulally took over Ford when Ford was in terrible shape. And he had a very kind of an interesting background because he had no automotive background when he took over Ford. Now, this was unheard of in the automotive industry. So most of the automotive industry had been run by people who had either incredibly long tenure in the automotive industry and or were founding families, such as Ford, of the automotive industry. So William Clayton Ford understood at the point where they brought Alan Mulally in that he could no longer direct the company, and that they needed some really serious and maybe different management talent to drive the company into a good competitive position again. So Mulally came from Boeing. And the whole idea here is that even though he came from an aerospace company, he also came from a company who had serious pressure, who was really undergoing very serious competitive issues, and it was also a big infrastructure company. Automotive infrastructure is one thing, but air and space is another, but it is a little bit compatible, I guess you could say. It's not like he was coming from consumer products to automotive. So this is a really good interview, actually. And I have put in bold some of the things that I took away from the interview that I thought were most important. So one of the first things is, it is an honor to serve. And if you read the article, and then if you take a look at some of his YouTube videos, he is very compelling when he talks about this. So the whole idea is he was really committed, very committed, to turning the organization around. And the second one that I've highlighted is, be authentic to who you are. What do you believe in, and behave accordingly? And I think if all of us do this, it helps us tremendously in whatever situation we are in. And then the last one I thought was very interesting because of the way he responded to that question on time and energy management. What gives you energy? Allocate time for things that give you energy. So if you read through the article, you'll see that he answered the question as follows. Every morning, he spent 20 to 30 minutes with his family having breakfast. No matter what crisis was going on at Ford or anywhere else, he allocated that time to spend with his family because it gave him energy to get through the rest of the day. And I thought that was a really kind of an interesting interesting choice and also an interesting observation. And he was amazing at what he did with Ford. So just to give you some idea, this is, I wouldn't say it's the Antichrist to Larry Ellison, because I don't know about Larry Ellison's behavior other than the success in the company and what he has communicated to the press. But this is a really an interesting way to look at things. And if you take some time, and he has a number of YouTube videos out there, maybe 3 minutes long, each of them, you may get a really interesting perspective on this guy. All right, what does it take to be a CEO? Now, I took this from a study that is done by Harvard Business Review every year. They do it, they come out with it every November. So while we are still in the class, the next one should publish, and I will keep my eye out for it so that we can talk about it a little bit. And it's what does it take to be a CEO? The top 100 CEOs are published every year in this article, and the research methodology is given within the article. So it talks about how they evaluate and how they rank and how they position these top 100 CEOs. So an interesting thing happened in 2015. They typically had been ranking the CEOs on financial performance of the companies. And in 2015, they interjected an environmental, social, and governance measure for the CEO / the company. And that was added to the mix. So it then became 80% financial results and 20% environmental, social, and governance. So at that point, Warren Buffett fell off the list, which I thought was kind of an interesting statistic. However, you see that on the right there, you see just a summary of what we have here. Only 3 are women, unfortunately. And these are global companies. They're not just US companies, they're global companies. 23 have appeared in 3 times in the past 5 years, 17 4 times, and 6 on all lists. So there is some really interesting consistency here in terms of the ratings of the people who have made these top 100 CEOs. And another thing is that that supports Collins' research is that 87 are insiders. In other words, they're promoted from within their own company. They are not brought in from the outside. And one of the things that came out of Collins' research is that the succession planning in different companies really was paramount in creating good CEOs. So keep that in mind if you are in the position to contribute to a succession planning effort or get into a succession planning effort. Now, 32 have an MBA and 34 have an engineering degree. And I think this last one of the 34 have an engineering degree has to do with the large number of technology companies which are represented in this top 100. And by technology, I don't just mean computers, I mean pharma and things of that nature. So technologies from a broader perspective. So keep an eye out from that. I hope they do continue to do it because it is it's an interesting perspective on the leadership of large companies, and it's also interesting to see how the mix changes year over year. Jennifer, go ahead. You had a question.
Real quick question.
Sure.
With regard to the 3 women, what sectors were they in?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have the article in front of me, but I can look it up for you.
That would be perfect.
Sectors. Okay. And actually, it went from 2 to 3 last year. So they were able to say, the number of women increased by 50%. But they also backed off and said, well, to be fair, we only had 2 and now we have 3. So that was the 50% increase. So I'll take a look.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, Allison, go ahead, please.
Yes, with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion, how does that get weighted, or versus, I know like with environmental, social, and governance being added in 2015, I know that, the whole diversity piece is something that's really increased the last several years.
Mm-hmm. I don't recall right off from the article about a ranking for diversity and inclusion. I think it was a fairly big step for them to move off of the financial only and create this kind of ESG metric.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have to go back and look at the article to see how that was handled, if it was handled at all.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So I am really not sure there, because if you think about where this research started, it was top CEOs based on performance. And, diversity is a part of that, but they have to be able to measure it and rank it somehow. So I am not sure how they would do that. They may have a way of doing it, but when I look for Jennifer's sectors for the 3 women, I will also see if there's anything mentioned on that. But thanks for the question. It's a good question. Anyone else? If not, I'll move on. Teo, go ahead, please.
Yes. So a few years ago, I read somewhere, a woman is most likely to become a CEO if the company is going through some troubles. Is that true?
I don't think I can say so overall, because there is trouble in a lot of areas. I mean, it can be competitively related, it can be process related, it can be financially related, it can be market related. So I don't do you have a basis for your question? I mean, did you read something that indicated that might be the case, or?
Yeah, I believe, this was a few years back. I think I read something about the lack of diversity when it comes to CEOs in Fortune 500s, and they made a comment about there's a better chance for a woman to become a CEO if there's financial trouble or something. Yeah.
Huh, that's interesting. Well, it could be the idea that companies believe they need to make a radical change,
Yes.
and that would be certainly a radical change, not to indicate that women were not or should not have been considered for the top management position in the past. But I think that there is sort of a more of an openness to consider that when the situation is dire, because they the leadership believes that they have to be really open to other alternatives. And it's actually, I think it's pretty unfortunate that women are would be considered as other alternatives. I mean, look at Ginny Rometty, for example, who is the head of IBM. She came up through the ranks, and she was exceptionally successful in the company. And IBM was not in a bad position when they put her in, when they put her in as the CEO. So I don't know if it's situationally dependent, or I think that it's becoming more so merit-based, because if you look at the number of women CEOs in different aspects of industries, in different industries, that there are more and more of them taking over. And I don't want this to lead to a larger discussion about women in positions of authority, because there have been there have been seriously a lot of women who have been heads of government, not necessarily in the U.S., but in other countries for a number of years here. But in any case, I would hope that it was not only because it was considered, oh, I have to do something and it's the point of last resort or something like that. But I can't speak to that easily. It's a long discussion in there. But thanks for the question.
Sure.
It's an interesting point of discussion. Okay, Keba, go ahead, please.
Okay,
Keba?
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think these are always interesting. Now you see these surveys seem to focus a lot more on women in terms of diversity, but they really don't focus much on ethnic diversity and racial equity, right? I know I read an article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, where only 3 Black CEOs of the Fortune 500, there's only 3 Black CEOs of the Fortune 500, and there were 5. The 2 that were replaced by white men, I believe. So it's funny that they look at diversity only from that standpoint. And when they look at the education, they also don't look at it from which universities. I think the top 4 universities are represented, of course, Ivy, it's Harvard, Yale, Cornell, and Brown, I think. But it doesn't seem like that discussion ever really comes into play with these surveys. Is there a reason why?
I don't know if there is a reason why, and I don't think it's, I don't know that it is intentionally excluded, because when you look at the article, there's a little snippet on each CEO, and I'm sure they have this information. I'm certain they have it. It could be that it's just not highlighted or what have you. And by the way, one thing that I found that was interesting that did speak to the diversity is the third bullet there. The 20 of these CEOs, so 20%, lead companies based outside their native country. So for instance, Satya Nadella at Microsoft and many others. There are a lot of CEOs who are not the typical what you might consider stodgy, um, um, uh, maybe
They're
white
not, they're not,
Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
they're not straight out of central casting, right?
They're not straight out of central casting. Yeah, exactly. And I've actually met some of these people, and they are stellar. They are just astonishing. They are brighter than bright, and they are focused, and they are absolutely the right people to be running the company. So I think that I was glad actually when I read the article, and they've had that I think for a couple of years now, maybe 3, could be more, but 3 that I can remember. They've had that how many lead companies, how many of the CEOs are based outside of their native country. So it's just not the collection of who you might expect, I guess you could say. So I thought that was quite good, actually, and I thought it was quite telling that that they highlighted that. So they're getting there. But I'm certain that they have that other information, where they came from, either that they have a limited amount of space that they have to write about. So either they thought that other aspects of the survey were more important to cover, or in terms of did they graduate from the Ivy League or other other areas. But I'm certain they've got that. I mean, when you do research like this, you don't just ask 10 questions necessarily and report on 10 answers. You have more data than that. So, but good question. Thank you. Okay, Nick, go ahead, please.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
You mentioned a little bit about succession planning within the top 100 here, and it said 87 out of the top 100 or of the top 100 came from within.
Yep.
I work in education, and I would say, there's been a change in dynamics over the past 15 years where, not to say that you were a shoe-in to get, somebody from within the organization to move up, but
Hmm.
15 years ago was a big advantage. Now I see more so, looking outside. I don't know if that's, if this number has been changing here as well, or how it's going, towards the future, if more of it's looking outside the organization, if it's staying, constant over the years.
That would be, you just have to go back through the previous, the previous publications to see that, to see what their comments were on that. But I think that the fact that they brought this up was pretty interesting, and there are a lot of pretty terrible examples of CEOs who have, and not necessarily in the education, from the education perspective, but certainly in the publicly traded companies, who have come in from the outside and who have just ruined or significantly, I don't want to say destroyed, but have done significant harm to the company because they had no clue about the industry dynamics. They didn't want to take direction from anybody, and they just did took some moves that were very, very detrimental to the company. So I can understand that the 87 being insiders are um, um, I understand that. I can see where that would be very, very important, because you have to have some institutional perspective in order to, especially manage and lead and guide a very large company. If you don't, you're, well, Alan Mulally is an example of somebody who is able to turn that into an advantage for himself. Absolutely. But there are others who have not done that. So there are some times when companies, and when the board of directors says, okay, things aren't working well, we really need some fresh ideas here. And that's when they will bring people in from the outside, from another industry, from another company, to lend a different perspective. And I think it takes a special person coming from the outside to make a really successful transition, and to give reasonable guidance and good leadership to a company where they have really no background for. Now, Mulally, in his case, it's not that he had a lot of background for the situation that Ford was facing, because he had been through it at Boeing. He did not have a lot of industry background, but he could apply what he had learned at Boeing to the situation at Ford and be very successful. Not only that, he could come in with a fresh perspective and ask a lot of questions that people who had been in the automotive industry for decades and who were so close to the problem, they couldn't ask those questions because they were just too close to the situation. So that it can be successful from that perspective. In terms of, I'm not sure about academia. I've seen a couple of situations where it's been reasonably successful, but it's been people bring people from the outside. But I've also, it's been successful, but it's also been painful. But significant change is always painful in one way, shape, or form. So that's kind of a long answer to your question. Sorry. But thanks for the question. Okay, Josie, go ahead, please.
Sure. I just have a quick question. In regards to the ESG measures, is that something that they developed specifically for identifying these people, or is that a set of measures that's already standard and exists outside of this?
I would expect that it's a combination of both. I don't know the proper answer to your question. They did talk about it in the research design, but I would expect that they would take guidance from other measurements. In doing this survey, Harvard works with an external research organization. So I have to believe that the external organization had some metrics to draw on. I don't know that they would have applied them just offhand and said, okay, we're going to take this bunch of metrics and apply it to this particular situation, but they probably took guidance from it because that's not unusual in a well-established research firm.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks. I guess I'm going to have to go back and dig up some of these other ones. Okay. All right, good. Well, I hope you found that helpful because I always look forward to it and seeing how things have changed and such. Now, to be fair, I've been tracking this for some years, and these numbers don't change a lot over time. I mean, there has to be a real specific industry event, or there has to be some big force majeure event that makes a change occur. But they do change a little bit, so it's always interesting to track what happens in this situation. Okay, so this criteria of an effective top management team, I think that this is not unusual for anyone. One of the things that stands out here, of course, we talked about executive succession. The team has a valuable and effective social network. Once you get to that point in the organization, if you get to the upper executive level of a company, it is likely that you have been in the industry for some time. It's likely that you have formed relationships with people in the industry that have been long lasting. You probably belong to industry organizations and have been for some time. So that is, I think that one kind of goes without saying. The ability to respond to a complex and changing environment, these people are faced with this every day. Whether they are successful in responding to that complex and changing environment is another situation, because some executives and people in general are just better at anticipating changes in the marketplace or being able to adapt to those changes in the marketplace than others. But it is, I think it's an increasingly critical skill to have as you go up the management chain. Okay, let's talk about vision, mission, strategy, and we'll just start on this and then we will take a break for a few minutes. But the whole idea of vision, mission, and strategy and the relationship between those is, I think it's really critical, because I have seen so many companies that have had very clear vision and mission statements that have driven them right through the organization and the behavior of the organization and the choices that the organization has to make in the different functional areas. So if you see here, the vision and mission really goes through and helps define the goals and the objectives and more tactically speaking, the specific targets and the measurable outcomes. So the vision is what the firm will be in the future, mission, what the firm stands for. And I give you on the right here some different definitions and strategies. So, you know, people often say, well, what is strategy? And you had a reading of what is strategy from Porter. And you see here, Porter talks about the unique and valuable position involving a different set of activities. And then you see the others as well. Now, all of these have things that are in common. And even if you go back to Chandler and some of the really early people, early academicians and early business executives who wrote about strategy, it all involves some sort of actions and activities, which is a good thing. And it is, but everybody has their own kind of different twist on it. Rumelt we have a reading from him a little bit later on. His approach is very actionable. He wrote a book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which is, you know, I recommend to a lot of my clients because it's so well done. And then I give you at the end an academic perspective. So there are, but they are all somehow, some way focused on how the firm will achieve its objectives and what the actions will be. So I see we are at the top of the hour. Before we get into a longer discussion of vision and mission, why don't we take a 5-minute break, come back at 5 minutes past the hour, and we will continue our discussion. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Let's continue our discussion. We'll talk a bit more about vision and mission. So I give you an example here about a mission statement that was put out over 100 years ago. And the whole idea here is the vision statement uses ambition and ambiguity. So it needs to chart a path forward, an ambitious path forward for the organization. But it needs to be a bit ambiguous as well, because the vision statement needs to be long-lasting. The vision statement can't do things like say, oh, our vision is to grow 10% a year or something like that, or get into these tactical details. It is really a long-term horizon-based, and it allows things to change within the firm without changing the vision statement. Now, I have seen companies adjust their vision and mission statements every so often, but it is over a period of years, and it is usually not that far off point when these adjustments are made. So it is something that has to be long-term, and make sure that the firm can follow it into the future. Now, here's a more recent example. We have Tesla, and they want to create the most compelling car company of the 21st century. And it talks about the transition to electric vehicles. So also a good vision statement. And it is far enough reaching that I expect that if they are around in the 22nd century, that things will have changed a bit. But the whole idea here is that it is a long-term statement about where the firm wants to go. All right, let's talk about mission now. Mission is what the company stands for. And it is not easy to craft a good mission statement. Now, vision mission statements are often maligned because this is not really a fill-in-the-blank type of thing. You know, you really have to think about what represents the company most accurately and what really resonates for the company both internally and externally, and what really can be used to set the tone for the firm and drive things for the firm. So on the mission statement, again, it's to give the firm its own unique identity. I give you this example for Amica. Amica, for those of you who don't know, pardon me, it is it's an insurance company. They insure personal property. They insure, real estate, boats, cars, whatever it is you have. And their mission here, and this was from the annual report in 2012, and I took this right from the annual report. So the fonts and the emphasis is directly from the annual report. So it is to create peace of mind and build enduring relationships. And I can tell you this is exactly what they do. I have been a client of theirs for many, many years, and they are exceptionally responsive. They are very, very good, and they pay a lot of attention to documenting any changes that you make. So for example, if you call them up, you ask them for a change in your policy, probably within the next day or two, you will have communication saying, we spoke to you, this is our conversation, these are the changes that we made, and this is the end result. And this whole idea of creating peace of mind and building enduring relationships really goes throughout the entire organization. So everyone that you speak to has this view in mind, whether it is an adjuster, whether it is someone you talk to on the phone about making a change to your policy, whether it is someone in the call center who has to answer a question for you, whatever. So it's really a terrific example of how the mission statement really drives the behaviors of the organization. There was a terrible storm up in the northeast of the U.S. back in 2009. It was a terrible ice storm. It took down power lines. It took down houses and trees and awful damage to property. People were without power for weeks on end. And they were able, I'm not sure how they did this, but I'm sure they had a process and plan for it. They were able to get adjusters out nearly immediately. And they said, okay, here's our estimate of what it is going to cost you to repair it. Here's a check, save your receipts. If it's not enough, we will sort it out later. They were very good. And they really take that kind of action in any kind of a claim that you have for them. So I was really pleased when I read this in the annual report in 2012. They have changed the mission a little bit, but it has not gone far off the mark. Another example we have is from Starbucks. If any of you have, obviously most of you are familiar with Starbucks. If you have read anything or done any research on Howard Schultz, this is completely indicative of what he wanted to do when he started the company. So a fitting mission statement. And then I wanted to give you an example of Zappos. Now, many of you have probably used Zappos. Zappos was acquired by Amazon some years ago, but when they started out, they gave the impression that, oh yes, we are an online retailer of shoes. Well, that is not what they started out to do. So the whole idea that they began with is that we are a service company. And they drove that idea through staffing and creating the call center. They drove it through their shipping policies, their return policies, their customer service policies, everything. And it was it's really pretty impressive to see what they did on the whole, putting the whole company together. So Brian, you had a question.
Yes, actually it was more of a statement. The Zappos, at the bottom we say Zappos is a service company that happens to sell clothing, shoes, handbags, eyewear, etc. That reminds me of a TED Talk by a guy named Simon Sinek. And he actually, that was the whole point of the TED Talk, was your customer isn't interested in what you're selling. They're interested in why you're selling it, because there are so many competitors in every industry. It's really important to tell why you're doing something rather than what you're doing. So I think Zappos is right in line with that.
Okay, good. And I've heard Simon Sinek before. I haven't heard him say that in particular, but he's a very interesting speaker. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, the golden circle.
Yeah, okay, I've heard the same thing too. Yeah, that's exactly what he was talking about there.
Okay, good. And the it's kind of it's an interesting point of view, and I think it's a different point of view that a lot of the retailers or other companies have. And I actually had a briefing from this guy one time, and he was absolutely focused on the whole service idea, absolutely focused. And the way they even staffed their call center was like that. So they had at the time I had the briefing, this was some years ago, they had their call center training center in Las Vegas. So they would take their recruits to Las Vegas, and not to enjoy Las Vegas from the gambling perspective, but to go to training in the call center. And the training was 6 weeks long, which is an amazing amount of training for someone in a call center. So they had what they would do was they would observe people and watch their performance over the first 3 weeks. If they at the end of the first 3 weeks determined that these people were not a good fit for the organization, then they thanked them, they paid them, and they basically dismissed them. They suggested that they go and do something else, and they just moved on. And it was it's just a very impactful way to kind of run your business. And there were other aspects of the business that followed that same criteria, which was one of a service business, not a retailer, not an online retailer. I have done less business with them since Amazon purchased them, not because I thought they were any they were any worse, but just because I have done less business with them. I didn't need to. But I assume there have been some changes since Amazon acquired them, but I don't know how serious those changes have been. But this is a really a great example of how this whole view, this overarching view of the idea of a service company can really affect and drive the business. Okay, so here we go. We get into the more tactical things now. So the goals and objectives come from vision, which is where the company wants to go, and they translate into clear, measurable targets. So here's where we get to the quantitative piece of it: 10% growth per year, 20% growth per year, whatever. Now, Porter's view on strategy, just to kind of wrap this up, because we had this reading for last week, and Porter, of course, is one of the very paramount figures in terms of publishing on strategy. He codified the 5 forces model in 1979. He's still publishing on strategy in different aspects of it. He's still at Harvard. So he's been doing this for quite a long time. But here you see, as I showed you before, it's the creation of a unique and valuable position involving a different set of activities. So it's, again, actions and activity based. And the idea, and we'll see this again as we get into the value chain and other aspects of it, is which set of discrete activities will result in value for specific customer groups. So he's always focused on activities, how the activities interact, and how the activities result in an advantage for the company. And he talks about operational effectiveness not being strategy. So why is this not strategy? Why is operational effectiveness not strategy? That was not a rhetorical question. Teo, go ahead, please.
Yes, I read the case, and I believe the case mentioned it's not, but it's a component of strategy, and you need more than operational effectiveness to successfully run a company. You could definitely say that. The whole thing is that if you are operationally effective, somebody else could be too. So it really doesn't differentiate you, and it really doesn't give you a sustainable competitive advantage because somebody can imitate it. And that's something that companies have to be watchful for, because if they create another way to be operationally effective, it's probably limited in the amount of value that it has for giving them a competitive advantage, because someone else will be able to imitate it over time. So there was a big push some years ago about how you could be
you could compete on operational effectiveness, you could compete on product superiority, or you could compete on customer relationship management. Well, yes, but those are all kind of limited in nature. Really, from the advantage standpoint, really what you need to do is find some other way to differentiate yourself, either from a process perspective or in some other category that is tough for your competitors to imitate and to subsequently kill that advantage for you. So he talks also about trade-offs. Trade-offs is also a big point of discussion for Porter. And this again comes back to the activities. And I think the important thing here is the last bullet, the choice of what to do and what not to do. Executives need to choose what they are not going to do, which is as important a choice as what to do. So consider this. Think about who your customers are and who you choose to serve in the marketplace. Choosing that base is pretty important. Now, if you are starting up as a company and you are just getting into the marketplace and you are perhaps testing the market on the reception of your product or service, there is obviously there is an intention to try different market segments and try to suit everybody in the marketplace. You can only do that for a certain amount of time because your resources will be spread too thin. The resource allocation will become increasingly difficult, and you really can't satisfy everybody. So it is important to choose what not to do, who not to pursue. As a customer, you need to understand what the cost to serve is. You need to understand what your the different buying preferences are of your clients, and you have to understand how that will work out with your resource allocation and how you can designate the appropriate resources to each customer group. So the choice of what to do and what not to do, I think, is really kind of paramount in this whole trade-off discussion. Now let's just a moment on fit. There are different kinds of fit, of course, that he talks about: first order, second order, third order. The third order fit is kind of a like self-actualization of the enterprise in terms of optimizing your effort and coordinating and optimizing the elements and the activities and the information exchange across different activities and through different activities. So it's a discussion that you will find often in his writings. And then leadership, of course, and he discusses that throughout what is strategy, and what to do and what not to do, of course, comes back on that. So just a moment on stakeholder analysis. I expect that many of you have conducted this before. Who has gone through a stakeholder analysis exercise in the past? Yeah, a few people. Okay. Stakeholder analysis is a pretty important exercise to go through if you are embarking on a change in strategy or a large project or a large process change or initiative or what have you. It is important because you need to understand who the stakeholders are, what they have to stand or lose from this different initiative that you are pursuing. You need to get feedback from them to understand what their position is on the change that's coming up and how they believe it will affect the organization. And it is, it's very critical that you are able to engage the more important stakeholders to help you get the project through. So there are some pretty basic steps that you need to go through in terms of identifying the stakeholders and then understand what the impact on them will be. So if you can take the time up front to do this, you will have a much greater chance of success on your initiative. You will be able to engage their support, hopefully. You will be able to understand what some of the pitfalls will be when you are going forward. And it's just invaluable time spent up front. Orkin, did you have a comment?
Yes, I had a question on this topic. Recently, I read an article stating that around 200 CEOs signed this agreement that they will no longer value stakeholders as the primary, as the priority. I was wondering if there's any updates in terms of to this theory.
They're no longer going to value shareholders as the primary.
As a primary stakeholder.
And was this in a particular industry?
I'm not sure, but there were many tech company CEOs.
Okay, so I am not familiar with the article, but there are shareholders are not the only stakeholders. So it could be somehow industry dependent, or it could be a communication by the CEOs of saying we're going to take a broader view on understanding who we really are serving here, and who really we need to take into account here on our as we push our strategy forward. So there has been, for instance, and we'll get into this a bit later, but there has been an enormous amount of writing and publicity on broadening the whole shareholder or stakeholder base to the environment and sustainability and things of this nature. And that has been, there's been a lot published that says that if you do so, you will probably outperform the market. I mean, there are a lot of different actions that are being taken, I guess you could say, by some of the large companies that have expanded upon just looking at specific shareholders, so investors, as the stakeholders. So could have been something like that. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the specific article.
Professor, can I just butt in? Because I can clarify that.
Okay, good. Go ahead, please.
Actually, Jamie Dimon of Citibank and about 188 other CEOs of Fortune 500 companies signed a letter saying, because since Milton Friedman, it's been determined that the primary fiduciary duty of a CEO is to increase shareholder value. And that wasn't always the case. If you read the textbook in the 1960s, it would suggest you had a fiduciary duty to your employees and to the community. And this was a letter suggesting that they were not going to concentrate solely on adding value for shareholders, that they were now going to consider the fiduciary duties to employees and to the community. Whether anything comes of that, I don't know.
Okay, so what you're saying is that Jamie Dimon and the rest of them were finally waking up to something that Friedman published in the 60s?
Well, no, they're not. They're rejecting what Friedman published in the 60s, because Friedman's idea is all you have to worry about, your only job is to increase shareholder value.
Okay.
That's what and they're kind of, and we've been following that script probably for the last 3 decades, and they're suggesting that they're not going to follow that script anymore.
Okay, good. Yeah, I misunderstood you. Sorry. Okay, good. Well, we'll see what he does. He's a pretty focused guy when it comes to making money. So I'll be interested to see how that actually goes out when it comes to the execution phase. Okay, thanks for bringing that up. Jennifer, go ahead, please.
Oh, I just wanted to say I'd worked for JP Morgan for about 14 years, and that's false.
So it is really the shareholders. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately. You know, it works out well when you can satisfy both. So for example, and we'll talk about this again a little bit later when we get to governance and corporate social responsibility, there are a number of large institutional investors and other firms who have taken a more active role in the governance of the firms that they invest in. So in other words, they will really focus very specifically on how the firms treat environmental issues and how they treat other aspects of their um, constituencies, I guess you could say, from the shareholder perspective. And in many instances, it works out that firms who pay attention to the environment, who pay attention to companies who focus on sustainability and what have you, can track a portfolio of companies who not only satisfy their shareholders by outperforming the market, but who also take a real focused effort on the sustainability and sustainability issue. So it's great when it all works out. I understand your comment on on the fact that companies really do focus on shareholders, but hopefully as time goes on, we will be able to, we collectively will be able to see that companies are really focusing on a wider view and can be successful focusing on a wider view. So we'll see, but thanks for bringing that up. Martin, go ahead, please.
Hi, yes, no, I was gonna say something similar to what you said. I work in wealth management, and we definitely, ESG is becoming a much stronger perspective on investment. And one thing that we have found is that companies that care about their employees and care about society and things like that tend to be run in a more ethical way, and therefore you tend to minimize the company exclusive risks that there tend to be. So now there's much of a preference towards that, and so we are seeing a lot of companies actively make those changes because they are realizing that investors in general are preferring those things, and there are tons of institutional investors that now have strict ESG requirements for them to invest. And so if they want the share prices to go up, you want more people to buy your stock, and so you want to appeal to those institutional investors as well.
Sure, because in the States, those are the really big investors, if you think about it. I mean, who controls the wealth in companies is it's very interesting discussion, and we'll talk about that more when we get to governance. But in the U.S., it's a lot of institutional investors, and in some other countries, it may be the founders, it may be the founding families, it may be banks, it may be some other institutions, but here it's the institutional investors, and if they're focusing on this, companies have to pay attention because that's where the money's coming from. Really. Okay, great, thank you. Kiba, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was going to say, coincidentally, I work for JP Morgan as well. There are a lot of things that JP Morgan has done that other banks didn't do so well, especially after 2008, with things like the Skills at Work initiative or Global Cities initiative, the investment in Detroit. They've invested in giving money back to employees that I think have an income below 50,000 or 60,000 in terms of helping with retirement savings. So there actually has been a lot more effort around stakeholder because it's about being a good corporate citizen. And I see a lot of those communications on a regular basis. So I would say that, while the big Wall Street idea of what a bank does, yeah, absolutely. When you're pricing a deal, when you're looking at something, there's going to be shareholder value consideration. But the firm as a whole, compared to other Wall Street institutions, they've done a really good job of looking at stakeholder value as opposed to just shareholder value.
Okay, good. This is that gives me hope for the future. But thanks for that. Okay, terrific. So what I've given you here are just some really basic charts on stakeholder management. There are far more elaborate ones. They are widely available. Basically, what you need to understand is what people have to gain, what they have to lose, how you are going to communicate with them, what you need from them in terms of a support. And you know, I think the communication piece is pretty important. I have seen huge change initiatives fail miserably because the communication aspect was not well executed. And considering the diversity of the workforce that you have now, I mean, even in terms of, not only in terms of gender and race and nationality, but also in terms of age, you really have to think about how you are going to get to people. So if you think about the fact that you probably have, unless you are a small startup or a very specifically focused company, you probably have people in the workforce who are anywhere from just getting out of school to approaching retirement age. So what are they going to react to positively in terms of communication? Will they react to an instant message? Will they react to email? Will they react to something hard copy? Will they react to better to face-to-face communication? It's important to keep that all take that all into account in order for your program to be most successful. And then we had talked a little bit about governance here. It really kind of sets the boundaries for the firm, and it talks about the internal control of the firm. So we have a whole section on governance a bit later in the term. It's a fascinating topic. It has been far more so in the forefront of companies and in really at the top of mind for people, especially in about the past 20 years or so, since there have been a lot of corporate scandals. There have been a lot of regulations put in place to try to monitor this. So it is a really great topic that we will pursue a little bit later. So finally, at long last, let's get into our discussion about the internal environment. The internal environment talks about the internal resources and capabilities that the firm can employ to create competitive advantage for itself. And these resources can be, as you see here, tangible or intangible. They can be undifferentiated or firm specific. The capabilities are also considered competencies. So the core competency of the firm, for example, as one of your readings. So it is the idea of expertise within the firm that sets it apart from other of its competitors. Kiba, did you have something else, or was your hand up from before?
I forgot to put my hand down.
Okay, no problem. Okay, some quick examples of capabilities. Walmart, of course, they have capabilities in many areas, logistics being one of them. They are they have a very strong logistics and distribution network. There are other areas where they have very strong capabilities from the process perspective, from the systems perspective. 3M also is another example of a firm that has great internal capabilities. They have new ideas, and they create new products from these ideas. They make it possible for their employees to spend time developing these new ideas. And these a number of the products that they have over the past years have created substantial revenue. Now, some companies will have a metric around this. They'll say, okay, our objective here is to have thus and such a percent of revenues every year come from products which were developed in the past year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever it is. So it is it's a pretty important metric. Some companies will publish this. 3M publishes this. HP used to publish this. I don't know if they still do, but a lot of the companies that are focused on innovation and development will make this publicly available information. Let's talk about other organizational resources. Trust is an important organizational resource, and it is an intangible resource. Trust is incredibly important. Many of you may have heard the saying that trust lowers the cost of transactions. Why is that? Why does trust lower the cost of transactions? Robert.
Could it be?
Oops.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Could it be because of? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say because less contracts are needed and less formal structures to ensure that somebody's holding up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, absolutely. There's less oversight required. You can get the contracts through. You don't have to, maybe you can have a check-in once a month or whatever the interval is, as opposed to every week. It is just so much easier to conduct business from that standpoint. Martin, go ahead, please.
Yes, and another perspective would be from investing. The higher the risk, the more return that is required for somebody to be even interested in partaking in that transaction or business. So
Yeah,
if you don't trust somebody, you would really need somebody of a very high incentive for you to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And also you would need to have like you said, you would need to have a higher level of intervention within the organization. You are, especially if it's a big deal, you are very concerned about what the outcome might be. So it's an exceptionally valuable resource, and the reputation of the firm in the marketplace is very important. The Morningstar ratings take that into account. So there's a lot of financial reward associated with something like that. And then also tacit knowledge can provide very critical advantages. And anybody who is in an industry where innovation and knowledge is considered a critical component of the firm's success is very exceptionally aware of this. So the explicit knowledge, not so much. If you can codify it, it's much easier to transfer, but the tacit knowledge involves learning by doing, and it's not easily transferred. It's much more valuable. Now, there is spillover that occurs. In other words, people change companies, and they can pass knowledge on to other people, but it is the learning by doing is invaluable. It's just invaluable. Okay, I'm going to I'm going to, I think, stop at our NASA example because we do need to spend a little bit of time on the Bosch case. I'm sorry that time kind of got away from us, but I didn't want to halt the discussion. I thought the discussion was very good. So I'm going to stop things here, and we will talk just for a few minutes about the Bosch case, because I think it's important to kind of get going in this sort of case discussion mentality, if you will. So we'll go down to that. So I do hope that you all had the chance to read the Bosch case. It's an important case insofar as it is highly indicative of the types of decisions that companies have to go through when they're considering moving to another country, and in particular, moving their R&D to another country, which is really considered by Bosch and by many others who are in the broader description of valuing technologies and valuing innovation. It's a real consideration and a real risk. So just in general, why do companies choose to locate their R&D in different countries? There are a lot of reasons.
The available talent in a particular location or proximity to end users or customers?
Yeah, absolutely. Talent and local resource talent is often critical. It's critical critical component that you often can't get in your home country, because these people understand the needs of the consumers, whether the consumers are end consumers or businesses. They understand what is required specifically for the environment. They probably understand what is required of the marketplace. And that is, those are three compelling reasons to locate your R&D in another place. Also, of course, in particular, if you want to, of course, penetrate that market. Okay. So who else do we have here? Okay, Sunil, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, I was just going to say maybe a cheaper cost of production. There's a lot of reasons. I mean, I know it's not the biggest, I think the ones you said, the first three were really important, but I was just going to add that one in there.
Sure, if you are following your R&D with a production facility, often the low-cost option is very compelling for you to pursue. And it's not only necessarily low cost in production, but these R&D resources, the engineering talent that you're seeking, could also be low cost, lower cost than you might incur in your home country or another more developed Western country. Okay, thank you. Martin, go ahead, please.
Yes, there's this concept of economic clusters, and that is that companies tend to form around each other because it allows for the infrastructure for that area to specialize on the specific infrastructure that those areas need, whether it's universities or or ports, or the bandwidth required for servers or whatever it is. And just a real life example now is that with the tariffs, the US government's trying to force a lot of companies to move to Vietnam, but the problem is that they don't have the infrastructure in place or the economic clusters in place to shift from China to Vietnam. So with R&D or just companies in general, they like to be close to each other because it lowers the costs of transactions because they're shared by the group.
Yeah, absolutely. And clusters is a really interesting subject to take up. I mean, I've had people in the class do their projects on business clusters, and it is it's fascinating topic because so many countries are heavily reliant upon this whole cluster. This cluster idea in terms of driving business into the country, driving the economic growth in different areas, and it has been widely used for decades now. It's really pretty important. So thanks for bringing that up. Okay, Jamara.
I was going to ask, I'm not sure because you specifically said research and development. Are there any tax benefits for choosing the location of your research and development field?
Could be, yeah, could be. And I don't know the details of all the tax laws in the specific countries well enough to comment on that. But yeah, there are definitely tax reasons that companies locate in one country or another, and that they bill in one country or another, and they do transfer pricing, and there are all sorts of different motivations for taking advantage of the tax structure. But that is a reason to do it. Yeah, I don't know if it's the prominent one, but it is certainly a reason to do it. Okay, thank you. Claudia, go ahead, please.
Could another reason be because of like red tape or different regulations in different countries?
Could be, could be. I mean, regulatory issues are always there. That's something that always needs to be considered when you're going anywhere, whether it's for R&D or whether it's for another means of entry or what have you. But those are important. Those are important to know. Okay, Butter, go ahead, please.
Yeah, do you think that if a company shifts to a foreign location, one of the reasons could be of cheap labor?
Sure, of course. Yeah, cost is always out there.
Like
Now,
how Nike moved to, I think, China or Indonesia, where they feel that paying its workers much cheaper there compared to the US or other, I guess, locations for that matter.
yeah, the cost of labor is always a consideration. However, it is also sometimes offset by some other factors that may make it less attractive to locate the R&D specifically there, because if you have low cost labor and you have a lot of IP theft, or you have a lot of attrition, or you have a lot of other offsetting elements that make it unattractive for companies to locate there, then cost goes off the table, really, because you will make it up in pretty quickly in other aspects of your costs to do business there.
True.
And risks. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But thanks for bringing that up.
Yep.
Okay. Ahmed, go ahead, please.
Yes, I would add that there will be an access for a wider range of knowledge and know-how through universities, other R&Ds with different companies, institutions.
That's all. Yeah, I agree. That's always a compelling argument if you have additional expertise available. Okay, all good ideas. Rizwan, and then we'll go on.
Thank you, Professor. I think one of the reasons I see it is because of the offshoring of R&D. You get a couple of advantages, right? One of them is obviously the advantage of innovation, which is not in the prime time on the western side of the house. So you have an R&D team which is offshore, which is working in a different time zone. And then obviously you can get a better understanding of a broader set of requirements and consumer space because you're in a different segment of the world, right? So it kind of helps a company to kind of grow and innovate from a business strategy standpoint as well.
Okay, all good points. Yeah. All good points, and thank you. So Bosch finds themselves in this decision point, and Stefan Tamla has to understand where he is going to recommend that the R&D for this low-cost braking system should be located. Now, here are the facts of the case are that they are going to be serving a market in China. They have to have a very high safety conscious low-cost solution, and they have somewhat of an R&D organization in China, and they have a very well-established R&D organization in Japan. The costs in China are lower, the costs in Japan are somewhat higher, but the Japanese organization has been known to deliver exceptionally good quality projects for many years. It is run by a German from headquarters, which I assume there's some comfort level there for the people in Germany who are making the decisions as to where this should be located. There is a good argument to be made for having it in China because the market's there. And if you recall from the case, they also want to be able to leverage this low-cost solution into other developing areas, such as South America, potentially Africa, what have you. So the idea of trying to develop it in China, there are some compelling reasons to do it. Now, there are also compelling reasons not to do it, and I'm really kind of summarizing this here because of our time constraint, but the whole idea of the organization in China has not been established as long as the one in Japan. It is being run by a fellow who has been with Bosch for some years, but he is from Spain, and he has only been there for about 7 months, I think, 6 or 7 months. So any of you who've been an expat know that you can get a flavor for what is going on in that time period, but you don't really understand what's going on in country within the business organization until you have been there for some time. So Delgado, who is the fellow I'm talking about right now, came from Spain, is very, very excited about the idea of the company establishing the particular R&D organization for this project in China. He feels it's a great idea. Now, there's some other issues going on as well. There's the situation with Li Chen. Now, Li Chen is a very good candidate to come over and run the organization, but he has some constraints. He's only going to be there a year. So what Bosch could potentially do, if they decided to locate the organization there, would be to get a strong second to partner with Li Chen so that he could work with them over the course of the year, and there would be somebody who would be well prepared to take over the management of the organization when Li Chen had to go back to the US. Now, one thing that came out in the case, which you may or may not have recognized, is that they were talking about the expertise within the Chinese organization, and they mentioned the fact that many of their developers were working on several projects at once. I think maybe they even said 10 projects at once. A lot. If you are doing really hardcore R&D, you're probably not working on 10 projects. So what this indicates to me is that the people in the organization were probably doing more localization efforts than really focused scientific R&D. So that's something that you have to consider also. Also, there were issues with IP, and there were issues with potential attrition. So there are some compelling reasons to locate the R&D in either country. The question is, which is the right choice? So I ask you all, where should the R&D be located? Should it go to Japan or should it go to China? Sean, what's your view?
Well, I thank you. I lean strongly toward it being in China. You look at the growth of that market, and it just really seems to be from the facts of the case that even though that there are some drawbacks there, and you laid out a great solution to Li Chen and all of that, but the issue of him having to leave, but him being there is kind of an alchemical plus, right? I mean, he's got a good background in the company, and he's got a fantastic working relationship with the people who are there. Also, just building that competency there in China, I think ultimately, tilts the decision toward having it there versus Japan.
Okay, good. So the risk is worth it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer, go ahead, please.
I actually agreed, and I meant to lower my hand. I have to agree with you, the last speaker's comments. I just think there's too much opportunity there to not, jump in, and I just thought it was a better play than going to Japan.
Okay. Okay, that's perfectly legitimate. Who else do we have? Let's see. Ina, go ahead, please.
I think that there are a lot of strong arguments for China, but what kind of tilts me toward Japan is that there's a lot of movement in employees. They don't seem to be dedicated, and the risk of the IP is big. It sounded like, you know, that information really has to be secured, and it's not in China from what I read. So if that information were to get out, then any foot up that the company had would be totally gone and defeat the whole purpose of the exercise.
Okay, and that's clearly a risk. And there are also other challenges that had to be confronted in the Chinese market. It was a highly fragmented market, if you remember who they were selling to. So it's just there's this whole long list of things that they have to contend with when they're making their decision. But you know, your arguments are very valid. Okay, so who do we have? We'll take two more and then we'll kind of wrap up here. So Michael, go ahead, please.
I would lean towards a different decision. I would lean towards, can't they split the R&D for this product line between Japan and China and do the pure R&D with Japan tends to have better quality control. And couldn't they do that and do localization activities in China?
That is an option. It is China and Japan have some kind of unfortunate history between them.
I understand.
Yeah, and that would be that would make things a little bit more tenuous in the relationship, but that's probably an option. Okay, thank you. And we'll do one more here. Allison, go ahead, please.
Thanks. I would go with the facility in China, really, because when we look at what one of Bosch's focuses was how development centers, you know, they stand out because they have additional developments within each facility that makes them unique, that gives them more independence. And I think because, you know, if you focus on that initial facility in China for R&D, you know, it was about how their 4-year plan was to waterfall out the strength of that single facility to build the competencies into other research and development centers across the area. So that way it stands in line with how Bosch is creating, you know, jobs and opportunities, focusing in the one area, clearly with Li Chen, but at the same time mapping out to have other facilities within the China area that are very independent because of their focuses over the next 4 years.
Okay, good. Yeah, and you know, I would agree. If you look at the way Bosch kind of moved their R&D and focused their R&D in different areas, it would be in keeping with their kind of overall strategy there. So to just to kind of wrap up here, the market opportunity is clearly there, and it's usually, if you can work out the other issues with locating in a place like China, it is usually a good move to be close to your customers and to penetrate, take whatever steps you need to do to penetrate the market. So sometimes the discussion goes that, well, okay, Bosch needs to make a larger beachhead in China at some point. Is this the project they want to do it on? And if they, you know, there's a pretty compelling market opportunity here. There is a lot of risk involved, but there is also, again, a pretty compelling market opportunity. And Bosch has been historically very good at going abroad and selling and developing in different areas. If you look at the case, they had you know, just a few years, relatively speaking, a few decades after they were established, they had a number of installations outside of Germany. So they have a long history of doing this. Now, this is a special situation, but most large companies are in the situation of understanding what they want to do with China. I have had and some companies are willing to go in and do this. Some companies are not. I have I've had executives say to me on the IP issue, if they are going to steal, I want them to steal from me, because they believe that the intellectual property enforcement will grow stronger over time, and the issue will subsequently fade away over time. So it's a really interesting proposition to make if they are willing to invest the time and the energy and the risk management that will need to be considered into this issue. They might well be in better shape to go into China. Now, I personally would think, oh, Japan, of course, Japan, because they have a long history, they're very good, they are, they have a long track record of success, what have you, but they're going to have to take the risk eventually. And to be fair, I don't know what they did. I expect they went into China on this, but I consciously do not look at the future outcome of this, because it will, I'm afraid it will influence the way I talk about the case. So that's kind of the situation there. It's an interesting problem. A lot of companies I know have actually pulled back. Usually it's the smaller to mid-sized companies. A lot of companies have pulled back their R&D from less well-developed commercially environments. So, so for instance, there are a number of pockets of expertise throughout the US who are in the Midwest or kind of in the mountain area that are low-cost living. People live out there because they like the lifestyle. It attracts a lot of talent, so a lot of companies have pulled back to things like that, but normally it's not the really big multinationals. And I say that from some research I've conducted. So in any case, thank you all for reading the case and offering your good suggestions. Typically, I spend at minimum half an hour on a case. This is a very short one this time, but I did want to walk you through some of the issues so that we could sort of get a head start on thinking about cases and how to discuss cases. So what we will do, and normally I don't go over either, so this is kind of an exception here. So what we will do next week, we'll kind of wrap up on the internal environment. I will give you some more information on what we will be doing in our on-campus weekend. Some of you have done this already, so you're old hands at this. Some of you have not. I'll give you some information on the facilities, how we will, the agenda, more detail on the agenda for the weekend. You can see in general the topics we're going to be covering. If you look on page 7 of the syllabus, and the cases that we'll be covering. I know it's a lot up front, but it is meant to be an intensive weekend, so hopefully you'll be able to get through the reading. I expect that that next Tuesday, after we wrap up on the internal environment and go through some of the logistics for the weekend, that you will be able to at least take a little bit of time and do some reading or some other, whatever preparations that you need to do for the weekend time. If you have any specific questions in the meantime, please reach out to me. You can phone me, or you can send me an email to the Comcast.net account that I've made available to you. That's usually the quickest way to reach me, and I will get back to you on any specifics that you might need to know about. So thanks again for your participation today, and I apologize for keeping you over. And I will look forward to meeting you on the web conference next week so we can prepare for our weekend. Have a good rest of the week and a good weekend, and I will again look forward to meeting you on the web conference on Wednesday. Thank you.